Greetings, fellow Empyreans. I am Ashterothi, and this is the Eve Universe Show with CCP Fozzie and CCP Swift. We are here because we received some pretty crazy news this week, enough that, like, I just had to message CCP Fozzie and be like, hey, do you want to chat about this? And he's like, heck yeah, I do. So we have a lot to go over. There's a lot of controversy, I would say, and some things that need to be cleared up. So first of all, I appreciate you guys willing to come here on such short notice to talk to me and the rest of the community about this. How have you guys been?
Yeah, been doing quite well. Just got back a few days ago from a bit of Christmas vacation, and looking forward to getting back into everything. This was the announcement that we knew was going to be the big splash for this first week back from vacation. So.
Right.
Yeah, I'm doing well too. I stayed in Reykjavik for Christmas and New Year's. It was really fun experiencing. If you guys are unaware, Reykjavik, or I guess Iceland in general, fires the most fireworks per capita of any country in the world for New Year's. So it starts kind of like it starts at like 10, but really like 11, picks up at midnight, and then goes on until like 3.
And for the next several nights too. People just use up all the rest of their fireworks. Yeah.
So it was a really fun experience to go outside and see that. So I had a great time, and winter here didn't really start until like today. So it wasn't even bad weather or anything.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad that you guys had a good vacation. You decided to throw a nice grenade into the new year first thing. So I thought I'd have a nice discussion about NFTs, something relatively uncontroversial. But then CCP Fozzie was like, you know what? I'm tired of Ashterothi talking about like other games and such, and I need to get his attention again. So congratulations, you got my attention. Before we get into the actual like nitty gritties of the hows and the whys and what's going on and all, or like that kind of stuff, let's just start with what is happening. So why don't you introduce like what exactly is going on?
Yeah, so we announced earlier this week that there is going to be a new event starting on January 13th, running until February 1st. Like our other live events, except this one is a crossover. It will be an official crossover with Doctor Who, the television show. And in this event, it'll be a very exploration-heavy event. It'll be a very new player focused event. With the hope that there'll be some folks who maybe are Whovians who haven't had a chance to try Eve yet who give it a try in this event. So we want to make sure there's lots of content that's very accessible to someone in their first week or two. And hopefully just something people will enjoy. I think there's some really cool visuals that go with it, some hopefully enjoyable gameplay. And yeah, then we'll be moving on to the next event after that, which will be the Guardians Gala.
Right. Which is like Valentine's Day, basically the Valentine's Day, or the February event, I should say. Right. So, but like, this is not only the first time this event has happened, but it's really the first time we've ever had a crossover between the Eve IP and a different IP, right? There's been other crossovers. Yes. You've done things like Project Discovery, which kind of blends the lines between in-universe and out-of-universe. This is the first like purely like on the nose mergence of an IP to Eve Online. And I think that that's a big reason why you're seeing a particularly high level of angst, right? Most video games or most MMOs could probably get away with a crossover like this without causing this kind of backlash. However, Eve has a 20-year history of kind of preserving the universe as a special thing from the trappings of the real world, as it were. What do you say to people that have that concern that this represents a violation of that which keeps Eve sacred and undermines the work that people have done to keep this like authentic prior to this?
Yeah, I think it's a fair concern. It's something that has been avoiding problems caused by cross over into the Eve storyline, avoiding having to be something that causes a detrimental effect on Eve's lore and story has been a priority for our team from the beginning of this project. And so it's definitely something like it's a concern that we share and hope to avoid with the way we're implementing it. This project has been on, like, it's been kind of on a slow burn for quite a while, but even before any of the members of my team got a look at this feature, it was something that was put past both our creative director, but also our narrative designers. And they got a pass on it and created a storyline that they decided would fit within the Eve universe and would not have a detrimental effect on the Eve universe. A way of making this crossover work in Eve. And so by the time it was something that the events team got a look at and we started making pitches for what kind of gameplay could be in it, there was already a storyline written for it by our narrative team that had all these concerns in mind.
And so by your narrative team, do you mean like Delegate Zero and those guys, like the people that you would traditionally think of as like
Yes.
the writers and keepers of the lore? Okay.
Yeah,
So this
Delegate
is like
Zero, and I cannot remember the dev name of the other
I
other
don't
designer.
remember it either.
But yes, yeah,
Sure.
we have 2 narrative designers on Eve Online.
So it's like the official lore stamp of approval, at least from the people that
Delegate
keep
Zero
it from
and
CCP's side. Got it. Well, that's really cool. But and it is true. You know, I've kind of thought about this, that like of all of the different IPs, of all of the different things that could somehow breach into the EVE Online reality, like Doctor Who is probably one of like the tippy top IPs that could somehow justify and get away with it, right?
It's an IP that easily breaches into just about anywhere, right?
Exactly,
There's
exactly.
definitely an element of that, yeah.
Right,
It's,
right.
it used to be Calliope, by the way.
Oh,
CSP Calliope. All right, there you go. Yeah, so Delegate Zero and Calliope both had a pass on it early on, and this is something that this was actually over a year ago at this point that they made their narrative design pitch for how it could fit within the Eve universe.
wow. Okay, so this has actually been in, like you said, it's been in progress for a very long time then.
Yeah, we haven't obviously been working on it actively that whole time. It's been one of the things that's been a bit of a slow burn, and because it's had to have approval from both us and the BBC worldwide, we would often have periods of time where like they'd send something over for us to take a look at our leisure, and we'd send something over to them for them to take a look at their leisure. And now is the time when it's actually ready to go.
All right, very cool. So I guess it makes sense. One of the things that frustrated me was like people that made the complaint like, well, EVE Online takes place 20,000 years before or after Doctor Who's already dead. I'm like, you realize he has a time machine, right? Like of all of the complaints that somebody can make, the idea that like this is impractical because of, you know, temporal distance is pretty absurd. But there are definitely.
I also want to say, and this is something I know that would come up anyways later as we talk about the lore here, but that concern does illustrate one of the misconceptions that someone could have about this, where someone might think that this somehow has Doctor Who and EVE Online existing at different points in time in the same fictional universe. That's not the case from our perspective or the BBC's perspective. These are 2 completely distinct, different universes that have not interacted in the past, interacting for the first time in a temporary way.
Right. And that actually brings me to one of the conclusions that I came to yesterday, which is one of as a person that has to explain the lore to the people, as it were, ongoing. The simple, even though you mentioned on Twitter that you made it explicit, I think it was on Twitter, that that they don't come here, right? That there's no encroachment of the Doctor Who universe within EVE Online. We get pulled into there. It's not that our universe is prepared for Doctor Who. It's that Doctor Who is so freaking weird that they can rip people out of EVE Online into Doctor Who, and that's just another episode, more or less, right? Which is true. I mean, like Doctor Who's set up that way.
And again, we can go into it in more detail later, but specifically what happens in this storyline is the materials become available coming through some kind of connection between the universes that allow capsuleers to build filaments that can take them to the Doctor Who universe.
Right.
but that also relies both on the filaments, but also on a temporary natural phenomena that does
But
end at the end of the event.
but even with that in mind, it still has a very particular implication, which means either the history of Doctor Who, like the episodes of Doctor Who that take place on Earth, are the canonical history of the EVE Online universe, i.e. they share one universe, or this is the confirmation of multiverse, the multiverse existing within EVE Online, that we've been kind of dancing around with things like the Triglavians and the three-body problem and all that kind of stuff, but have never gotten confirmed. And it's kind of frustrating to me if the idea of a multiverse being confirmed in EVE Online came from this event. How should I resolve that?
It is the latter of the two. It is the multiverse.
Okay.
But that is something that isn't entirely new, though, in that Eve Echoes is also a different universe than the main Eve Online universe.
But it is also written off as being explicitly non-canon from the Eve, like the Evo side of things, though. So, like I said, they've danced around this topic. I've kind of mused about this possibility since Vegas 2019. But this is the most on the nose, in universe, canonical. Like, guess what? There's parallel realities that we've ever gotten. So, was there a concern about that, or is that basically like that was an accepted thing within the game, and the fact that this happens to conform to that is just the nature of things?
It was something I know from my perspective, at least, as someone who's not one of our direct narrative designers, but is fairly heavily involved with the lore otherwise, as like a stage below them. It is something that I had considered fully already established by Echoes,
Right.
and that this is just a continuation of that.
Fair enough. Okay, so that's interesting. Because of the whole like canonicity thing between Eve Echoes and Eve Online, that obviously will probably evolve over time. But before we dig it too deep into the weeds about like the lore and the justification, all that kind of stuff, I want to take a step back and talk about why this is happening. Why would CCP, like, you can make an explanation for it, but ultimately we're twisting things in order to make it work on some level. What makes that worth it? What made you guys want to do this? What is the catalyst for this? What is the story behind why this is happening? And while you explain that, I'm going to go turn off the background sound.
So this is a project that, like I mentioned, has been in a slow burn for quite a while. Obviously, I wasn't privy to the initial discussions, although I do know that it started with BBC Worldwide reaching out to us and proposing some form of this. Obviously, the form of it was established later after our designers and their folks got more heavily involved with it. And from CCP's perspective, our main goal is to create both a fun event that's exciting for players like any of our events, but the specific benefit of it being a Doctor Who themed crossover is it's an opportunity to expose Eve to a whole bunch of sci-fi fans that maybe haven't been familiar with it before, or have heard of it but haven't really decided to give it a try before. So we see this as a good opportunity for increasing Eve's exposure, bringing more people into Eve, and from the BBC's perspective, they see it as an opportunity to increase Doctor Who's exposure as well.
Yeah, and when you get your hands
Was this a
on the
financial
event itself-
Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, when you get your hands on the event itself, you can kind of see a lot of that as well, because there are elements to the event that are very new player friendly that people can do pretty quickly after starting EVE Online, as well as like there's more challenging aspects as well. But there's an element where you can just be essentially a new player and pop in and see what EVE Online is like and experience the event as is going on.
Yeah. Because of the fact that we have the hope that this will be a method that attracts some Whovians into Eve to try for the first time, we wanted to make sure that the event was very new player friendly. So getting started in the event has about the same skill requirements as the career agents. It is essentially the lowest possible difficulty exploration sites using relic analyzers. That is the entry level to the event, and everything kind of spins off from there. And
Whereas
then the
most
first combat
events
encounters can be done with essentially your first Tech 1 cruiser.
Right. And most exploration sites, it's probably worth noting, for the last few events, have been explicitly hard to scan down, such that
Yes.
it becomes like a barrier to entry. Only the correct ship type and all that stuff has the capability of scanning it. This is much more available, and you actually have a series of boosters that are part of this to help augment people that may not have the skills for their scanning or relic hacking.
Yep, and those boosters, they're limited time boosters for expiration again, and they both drop in the event, and you can get them from the daily login campaign during the event. Yeah, so we hope that this will be something that both new folks can get involved in, which is something that's a bit unusual for our events. Most of our events are more aimed at veteran players, under the basic assumption that for a new player, everything in EVE is new to them. So having content that's fresh and cycling through is much less important for new players than it is for veterans in general. And this event is the exception because of this potential opportunity to bring some new folks in.
Sure, absolutely. So I guess the consequence, though, is, if it's easily accessible, you also have the combination of the fact that while there is like cosmetic items in this and like trinkets and doodads, there's no new modules, there's no new implants, there's nothing of those things that like make events worth a lot. What is going to make these events worth doing if they are so easy to be done, so broad? And at the same time, if they are worth a lot to do, is there going to be too much competition for these sites if everybody can do them?
So I want to set expectations. This event is not going to be as lucrative for a veteran player as the Winter Nexus that we just had, or as the Guardians Gala, which is coming up afterwards. So this is going to be one that is, there will be some opportunities, especially considering the relatively low entry cost of ships involved. It's exploration frigates and Tech 1 cruisers. There's definitely going to be opportunities to make some ISK that's worth it, but it's not going to be the kind of thing that is, you're not going to be like getting value for bringing a Marauder in. In fact, you can't bring a Marauder into the content, unlike the Winter Nexus and the Guardians Gal, which are both aimed at veteran players and have the rewards balanced appropriately for that. The rewards in this event include skins. So there's a set half of the skins that you've seen on Sissy are dedicated just for the event loot. The other half are for store packages, sales, stuff like that. And some of the clothing items are distinct just for the loot as well. And there's also going to be like drops of the boosters, those same boosters that you'll get in the DLI, and cerebral accelerators. And then there'll also be essentially a equivalent to red and blue loot, an object that's only purpose is to be traded in for ISK NPCs.
And it does seem to suggest that it'll be all NPCs, whereas normally it's like only Concord has the buy orders. But the phrasing seems to be that like basically every station will have NPC buy orders.
Yeah, not quite every station, but yes, it'll be more available than most of these. So it'll be the main Empire navies and the pirate factions and air, basically, will be the ones.
I see. Yeah, got it.
The also as well. You'll be getting blueprints and materials that are used to build the filaments. So obviously that's just sort of to sell. That's something that the main demand will be driven by other players, but those materials can also be sold to NPCs as well if you can't find other players willing to pay more for them.
Right, because it seems that the blueprints are going to come from one phase of the event, and the stuff to actually build it will come from a different phase. So like you can either farm them both, or you can like get a blueprint and then purchase from the market somebody who has farmed the high sec site or the case-based sites. Is that pretty much?
Yeah, the blueprints and the materials will both drop from the content, but the content will be dropping essentially the equivalent materials and blueprints required to access the filaments, the same ones you use to get into that content, and the tier above for the most part, and a little bit the tiers below as well. Similar to the way you see the loot drop for the Abyss, where we drop like the filaments that are appropriate to the tier above and below you, the one you're running, except in this case, instead of the filaments themselves dropping, you're getting materials and blueprints.
Right. Okay, great.
And we also intend the industry side of this to be very accessible to new players as well. All of the blueprint manufacturing is intentionally set up to only require Industry 1, so new players can get involved right away. And the volumes of materials and everything are set up in a way that should keep things pretty competitive between new and old players for the actual manufacturing. So from a new player perspective, if you start playing the game in the first like week and a half of this event, you'll be able to learn exploration, learn the basics of industry, and learn basic combat with cruisers, and get through the early tiers of all three of those elements.
That's a very cool idea, to be honest.
Yeah, so you won't need like Industry 5. You won't need
No, it's all
any of
Industry
the
1
level
across the
ones.
board for this. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also noticed that it seems that there are actually tasks to gain points, like, you know, just like there's combat and hacking tasks, there are actually industry and market tasks, interestingly enough.
Yes, so this is something that we haven't done in previous events, but we're using this as a bit of an experiment for it. See how players like that element, in the same way as like for the events like the Winter Nexus, we tried to have a variety of different activities. Like you mentioned right before the stream, we've took the feedback from the Winter Nexus from the year before, that the balance of the points for the season wasn't enough for the exploration side of it, and tweaked it again this time. So we'll see what the feedback is from this, and we'll be able to use that information to help inform future events.
Right. And I have up here right now, because we talked about the skins. The 2 tiers of skins there are kind of lower subcap cruisers and such, cruisers and Navy cruisers and battle cruisers and such, which are the base skin that has less of an effect.
And that's the one that drops from the site.
Right. And then there's the other one, which is for battleships and supers, which looks a lot shinier and has some really cool particle effects.
Yes. So that has the particle effects that are intentionally similar to the particle effects you see with the fireworks for the event and in the actual Doctor Who space and on the other side of this universal connection in the nebulas. Those ones are going to be accessible through packs. Our like sales folks will be taking care of that. And like as always, for stuff that is dropped from the event sites and stuff that is sold in packs, you'll be able to sell it on the market, so you can just trade it to other players for risk as well.
And before we get into anything else, I will say that the avatar skin for this is just so good. It's stunning.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. You should check out the avatar one. It looks super dope. I was talking to CCB Paragon, and we agreed that we were going to grind the heck out of this until we can get an avatar skin.
It's frustrating because like I'm not a supers guy.
The way to get that is going to be through. I don't know all the exact details, but one of the packages that'll be for sale. But then you can always buy it from other players with ISK.
Oh, okay. We'll buy it from another player. We'll grind so hard we can buy it from another player.
I guess that does make sense because you don't necessarily want like a reward in the track. Be like, hey, this is a new player event. The final reward is a Titan skin.
Yeah. So the ones that drop from the site are up to Navy battlecruisers, and then we also have a whole different set of skins that is available through the DLI, the daily login rewards, and the season track, the points, and that's the Versus Red Force and Blue Force skins. It's right. a pattern that we've used before, but we're bringing it to a bunch of the exploration frigates and covert ops, as well as Tech 1 cruisers. So that's nice, and that those are the ships that are most effectively used for this content for this event.
Right. Yeah, I didn't really show those off because we've seen them a lot before.
Those you've seen before on the Society of Conscious Thought ships. Yeah.
Right.
They're really cool pattern. I really like them. I'm glad we were able to bring them back for this. And they are the ones you're going to get for essentially like for free in the DLI for the frigate and covert ops ones, and then for the season points for the cruiser ones. And
and I know there's one for a Drake too. So
the Drake one for the
Drake one
warp
is
convergence is really good. It's really good.
Yeah, the drops from the side. Yeah, Drake and Navy Drake.
Yeah, I really would have liked the navies to look different than the standard, like maybe inversed, but I guess I can understand. So. But I feel like we've also like gotten ahead of ourselves again. So let's go back a little bit to like the origins of this and the deal that made this up. You pointed out that BBC approached you guys. So was this a matter where they paid you for exposure? Was there a financial transaction here? What behind the scenes, what is going on?
Now, my understanding is there is no financial transaction, that instead it is just a cross-promotion agreement where the benefit that both parties are getting out of it is that we're getting more exposure for the stuff that we make. We're getting more exposure for Eve among Whovians, and they're getting more exposure for Doctor Who among Eve players.
Right. And the thing I noted about this is that the play, not only does it potentially attract a new audience to EVE Online, but it's a certain kind of audience with a certain kind of expectation, right? Like they're less likely to be, let's go get into the big nullsec war because of BTAC-R or something like that. They're more likely to be interested in EVE for the exploration, for the discovery of things, and kind of appreciate things on a different level than what a lot of the player base that exists now would. Is that a piece of it that like you're trying to grow that aspect of the player base by attracting people that would be interested in it?
I don't think we know enough about what groups of people are going to be coming in for us to be able to make that sort of detailed prediction. At least not in any way that I'd feel kind of safe making a prediction about. Instead, and we do know that there's overlap between EVE players and Who fans. I mean, especially in the areas where Doctor Who is very big, right? So especially in the UK, less so in the countries where Doctor Who is less known. But I think we're just expecting that it's a big sci-fi property that we think that some of the folks that are fans of it will be interested in giving EVE a try, and some percentage of those will find that EVE is the game they've been looking for all along.
Right.
Yeah,
So
I think you've already even found like there are some people on Twitter that are just like, hey, I heard about this for the first time. Someone walk me through what this EVE Online thing is. And that's kind of what we're hoping for as well. Like that's a really neat thing. Also, a few of my friends that have like real life going on, so they don't have as much time for EVE anymore. They saw this. They're like, oh, crap. This reminds me I have to play EVE. And they just are reinstalling it. I see my Steam light up some more. So that's another thing we want to do as well.
that's cool. Yeah, I have noticed that it's been interesting to watch the discussion grow, happen both from the EVE Online community side, but also the Whovian side of things, right? Like they also got this announcement. They have a totally different perspective of things.
There's a section on the Doctor Who website, just as there's a section on our website about it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And for the most part, I have heard that the Whovian population has been largely positive about this change or this kind of announcement. Whereas, obviously EVE Online players are a little bit more trepidatious about it.
EVE players are more guarded about sharing their lovely game with the world. They don't want it to see it deteriorated or anything like that. They don't want it to be like pumped out or anything, which obviously, as Fozzie explained, is not really what's going on at all.
Right.
One of the other things that I saw like pop out that I do want to address, I saw a few people mention this both on Twitter and on the EVE subreddit. There's like some Doctor Who card game that has NFT stuff related. So they're like, oh, this must be CCP doing something with NFTs. There's absolutely no NFTs involved in this at all from our side or the BBC side, and there's no plans for it either. Like this was not part of it. There's no tinfoil going on back there. So you can lay that to rest definitively. So that's you can sleep a little bit easier now.
Yeah, that is definitely like the whole conversation about that, NFTs and all that stuff in gaming culture, not just in EVE Online, but it's kind of raging through the gaming space right now. This is a whole nother conversation.
Absolutely,
so
yeah.
we're going to set that one aside for now. But the phrase I used earlier, or the word I used earlier, which I think is kind of apt, is the sacredness of the EVE universe, right? And the EVE lore. There's been a lot of work previously to make that, true. On the one hand, you could argue that this is just weird enough to allow it to interface with us for this period of time without disrupting the lore, the story, or the universe itself too greatly in the long run. However, there is obviously the concern that this opens up the possibility of now we have crossovers. So like, when are we going to have the Battlestar Galactica crossover or the Star Trek crossover? Like, is this a herald of future things? or is this like an incredibly rare exception?
I think honestly, the honest answer to that is that I don't know. It would depend on what kind of opportunities come up, and if we ever do any more crossovers, we'd always approach them in the same way we approach this one, where it's always the Eve creative team and the Eve narrative team that have the opportunity to make sure that there's boundaries set, and that it's set up in a way that is appropriate for Eve. But we don't have any other plans to do any others right now, at least not to my knowledge.
And one of the concerns that I have, and I've expressed, is the fact that there are these items that will come out of it, the scarf and the 11th Doctor outfit and stuff like that, that even after this event is gone, those things will remain in the game forever. It's always going to be a thing that happens. There's always going to be now people that throw on the Doctor's outfit and be trolls about it or whatever. Like, is there any concerns about that now that there are these weird anomalies within the universe? Or yeah,
there's definitely I'll say that was taken into account when we decided what we were going to put into the game temporarily and what we were going to put in permanently. I think that's a good way to phrase it. We were very careful about the stuff that is going to be in the game long term that you can't take back, to make sure that it's not going to have a negative effect on the game. Like, from our perspective, obviously there's subjective stuff here, so people may have different opinions. But we wanted it to follow the same kind of example of other Easter eggs that we've had in the game before, where it nods and winks to the other property rather than being explicit about it. In the same way as we put the David Bowie memorial in, where we have Major Tom's shuttle, but we don't actually have David Bowie's name in that, right? Because that wouldn't be appropriate for the Eve lore. But instead, it's something that, as players outside of the Eve universe, we know what it means,
right.
But for the people within the Eve universe, it's not something that has as clear of a connection. And so that's something that we consider to be, and our creative team and narrative team consider to be appropriate in this case. There were definitely cases where, as this discussion went on over the last year, where we proposed ideas or kind of bounced around ideas that we then decided, you know what, actually that wouldn't be appropriate. Let's not do that. There's an earlier version, for instance, of the firework. I can say the firework that's in the game right now that's coming in for this event is a really cool firework. It is a very colorful set of essentially particle effects that look like the nebulas on the other side of this connection with the Who universe. But there was an earlier version of that firework that would have been too on the nose, that we decided, you know what, for something that's going to stay in Eve, that's something we don't want it to be that on the nose, and so we intentionally pulled it back to make it something more oblique.
Yeah, and it is absolutely true that, like, it seems that measures have been taken out that, like, we know that these things are related to the thing, but our characters wouldn't even be able to make that, wouldn't have a reason to assume that. I kind of made the joke that, like, chances are we as characters would just see this as like, wow, that was a really weird sleeper that we ran into, because, you know, very similar design of like a disc or whatever.
So I know one thing that we knew would be a concern among the fans and people knowledgeable of Eve lore is the fact that Daleks are a intelligent non-human.
There you go. That was my next question.
And so I had a chat with Delegate Zero about this. It had come up a few times in our discussions earlier, but yesterday actually, to make sure I was going to be able to say stuff that is fully Delegate Zero approved, I had a chat with him in prep for this stream. And yeah, the intent from our side is that it is not clear to Capsuleers that these are non-human origin, or that they're essentially aliens.
But it is true, though, that this is the first encounter with an actual full-on alien intelligence that we've ever had, even if we're not aware of it. We've gone from there's no intelligent aliens in EVE Online to, well, there was that one time.
Yeah, we've gone from there's no intelligent aliens in EVE Online to, for 3 weeks, there was intelligent aliens that EVE players could visit, but then they can't anymore. Yeah, but they don't know. They can't, or at least they might suspect, but they don't know for sure. When you destroy these Daleks, you're not going to be able to get enough from the remains to be able to tell. The way we're describing them in the client is biomechanoids,
Right.
and this is something that we went back and forth with the folks at BBC Worldwide about, and we made clear to them we want to make sure that there is that dividing line. That the word Dalek, for instance, is something that we use in our out of character communication, but it is not something that will exist in character in EVE Online, because there's no way for the EVE characters to know this, and so we want to make sure we were keeping that integrity of the EVE universe. So from the EVE character perspective, these are being referred to as biomechanoids, and whether they're of human origin, or whether they're some kind of biomechanical device that's created by humans out of some other non-intelligent alien DNA or animal DNA or whatever, that is the kind of thing that our characters would not actually be able to find out from this event.
Right.
Yeah, it's very much not like ham-fisted, like just Doctor Who stuff thrown into the Eve world with no consideration, right? Like there was a lot of careful consideration that went in to make sure that this was treated appropriately, not only for the event itself, but for the game as a whole over the past 20 years or so.
Yeah.
So I assume that these things that are labeled like Dalek frigate, wreck, Dalek cruiser wreck, those are going to get renamed before they hit Tranquility. Then
those are not those strings are not visible in the client unless
Got
you're
it.
using that trick.
I guess you're right. It is a non-interactable object. Never mind.
Yeah. So non-interactable objects, for anyone that's not familiar, this is a little bit of good kind of Hobo Leaks knowledge for anyone that's interested in keeping up with this kind of stuff. Items in the group non-interactable object are objects that we put into sites as visual background objects, but that you can't target, you can't show info on them, again, unless you're using the kind of copy paste trick that's being used here.
Right.
So they are not considered, the names of them are usually just like internal shorthand.
Fair enough.
So you'll see a lot of random stuff in those text strings, but it's not something that is visible in the client in normal gameplay.
That's true. There actually was other things that I just knew to take out, like the nebula and, planetary backgrounds, things that weren't useful to look at.
In this case, I mean, one thing that we could have done is make it more oblique. Like we often name them after the internal naming structure of our graphical assets. We could do that with them, but they're set up in a way that already they will not show up in those text strings will not show up in normal gameplay in the client in any way. The ones that say Dalek or say TARDIS on them.
So let's talk a little bit about the development effort that went into this, right? So I've heard everything from complaints about like Edencom guys complaining that it's like, why do we get this instead of lore movement in our stuff? I've heard people that are interested in cat ears being like, why do we get a Doctor Who scarf before we get cat ears? We've got people that are complaining that, with nullsec being the way it is, like, why are we doing a Doctor Who event now? Why are we wasting our effort on that? How much actual development effort was allocated to making this happen as opposed to other things? And what did this represent as like a technical event for you?
So this is something that is being done with work from the events team, the team that I'm a part of, as well as our graphics and audio teams. It's like most of our events, it is a fairly low investment. So one of the things we try to make sure we do with the events is keep them good bang for the buck, avoid having to put a whole lot of development time and effort into them. And we get a lot of savings of time and effort by making a limited time event versus permanent content. We can be a little bit faster and looser with some of the experimental designs. We can try things out knowing that if they don't work out, they'll already cycle out of the game. And we do a lot of like reusing assets and taking shortcuts. So yeah, I'd say this, like, to give a comparison point, at the moment, the EVE live events team is like between 3 and 4 people's worth of time allocation. We have a few people that are partly on this team and partly on other teams. And then we got there's obviously the additional time from the artists, but the artist stuff was sped up by assistance from BBC. So for instance, they were able to get us the 3D assets from their side that we could then use to help shortcut some of this stuff.
That was what I was going to ask. How much of the work of the actual development, the 3D assets, the design, the whatever, was done by BBC? How much of this was effectively outsourced?
I'd say they made it a lot faster by
Fair enough.
providing us assets that we could start from. So especially for things like the saucer, the high detailed models were made a lot faster because of that. The EVAR team did still actually put those into the engine and tweaked them and made them appropriate for the Eve graphical style, and also created what's the stuff you're going to see once you get into the site, some really amazing nebulas and planets and stuff like that. And it all looks really, really great. But it's set up in a way that is that fit in with the rest of the stuff that the art team had to do on their plate,
Sure.
not something that was going to displace other content.
So I'm going to be a little bit more on the nose about it. FanFest is coming up soon. We normally have kind of a lull before FanFest, and at the same time, we often see you guys experiment with different mechanics before like the real version of it comes out, right? For instance, the SEC sites that came out were kind of a test bed for future events or future sites that then rolled out. They've straight up said that. At the same time, we have a lot of new things about how events work that we haven't seen before. For instance, one of my biggest complaints about event sites has been tying the progress to the killing of the ship, which really locks down like who can get the rewards and how that gets shared and how people can work together. In this event, it's damage based, not kill based. We have the new mechanics involving getting rewards from both industry and the market. We have the use of filaments to create pocket universes to engage within the events stuff. How much of this was actually just an opportunity for you guys to test some stuff that you needed to do for last minute testing for future stuff, given the fact that there is big stuff coming rather than,
So what I can't talk about stuff that other teams are working on, partly because it's not ready, and stuff other teams are working on is not ready to announce yet if it hasn't been announced, but also because I'm not an expert in that stuff and I'm not fully up to date with a lot of what other teams are have potentially in the pipeline. Or at least I'm not the person that knows the most about them. So I can speak to that from the events team perspective, and
Right.
from our team, for the work that we're doing for events, we're always trying to make sure that we leave the option open for other teams to make permanent content using the tools that we're making, learning from the stuff that we're doing. But our the stuff that we can do most easily is make things that then we can reuse for other events. Yeah, there was refactoring work done for this, for the system that generates content in a similar fashion to the Abyss. So it actually doesn't use the Abyss code paths exactly. It does something a little bit differently that's a bit more reusable and more flexible for the future. So we're leaving ourselves some cool options open there. And yeah, getting all this learning and experience around new techniques for giving out points for the season and stuff like that. So I don't think any of that stuff that we're going to be that we're hoarding for a FanFest announcement, the event stuff is generally fast enough pace that we're just kind of getting it out there really quick. So we're not really holding our stuff back for FanFest, but I'm sure there's other teams that are.
But at the same time, given the fact that it is complicated for CCP to roll out big things right now, given the fact that there's a big, there's a focal point of energy coming up. So this time period, January, February, March, on years that have FanFest, has always been kind of a refractory period. I remember having podcasts every year. Podcasts of people it's been a while since CCP has talked about anything. Always around February, right? So is this an easy opportunity to provide content during this time without necessarily cutting into the budget of the larger efforts?
So we're always trying with the events. We're always just trying to produce stuff all the time without cutting into the budget of larger efforts. That's kind of the mission statement of the team. So I'll say that tendency is absolutely the case, that there's often less stuff announced at the very beginning of the year. That, in my mind, has more to do with Christmas vacations.
Fair enough. That's a good one too.
FanFest prep, but some elements there might be an element of FanFest prep to it in some years. For the events team perspective, we are generally trying to just make sure there's a really fast pace of stuff. So you're always going to, in any given month, you should see stuff from us, and it's not just that we're trying to. That'll be the case whether there's a big permanent feature being added to the game in that month or not. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
And
it's just kind of like the MO of the team, of the live events team, is just to have live events. Like, if it wasn't if it wasn't this event for January, it would have been another event for
Yep.
January.
Well, honestly, we actually have had years. The time where we've had events in January have been like Dragonar Blitz, which I remember if I talked to CCP Fozzie about it, it just happened. Like they needed to do that, or, you know, had something ready for them. Normally January is a quiet time because like nobody does anything for Christmas.
Yes. Yeah. So normally what I'd say is in a usual January, if we didn't have this crossover available to us, we probably would have done something a little bit lighter in January. And then we, of course, have the big event with Guardians Gala in February, which is always one of our biggest events of the year. So it's pretty normal to have something be a little bit lighter in January. We probably would have done something like another mining blitz event with adding some more skins to the mining expedition, or the former Resource Wars LP stores, and making those available for all empires for a week or something. We probably would have done something like that. The fact that the Doctor Who stuff is landing in January is because this is the best time slot that we had for it. We knew we didn't want it to overlap with one of our existing like events that have a set time. We didn't want it to overlap with the gala, for instance. We didn't want it to overlap with the hunt. So this was a good time slot in our schedule.
Right. So just because there is some of this stuff in chat, I just want to circle back on the idea that like, it wasn't that you guys, people are asking like, why is Doctor Who? But it's not like you chose Doctor Who among a platter of different IPs that you could do a deal with, right? This is,
yeah, it's not like we like went to the IP store on Amazon and like bought a event license. This was a agreement that we made with BBC Worldwide that seemed like it was going to have a good benefit to the game. If somebody else had made a pitch to us, and if it had fit as well as this does, then we might have done that. But yeah, this is the agreement that was presented to us, and we decided, yeah, this is going to be good.
have there been agreements like this that have been proposed to you guys that you've rejected just because it didn't work with Eve, or?
If so, then that would have been before it got to my
It didn't even get to your table, yeah.
So it's possible, but not that I'm aware of, but I wouldn't necessarily be aware of it. So again, for anyone that missed the beginning of this, the point that like my team and myself got involved in this, because unsurprisingly, in the early stages of this event, it was heavily NDA'd. They didn't want it leaking, so it was a small group of people that first knew about it. So it was like the Eve team leadership folks, the executive producer, creative director, all those folks that were involved earlier, and then it went to the narrative designers, CCP Delegate Zero and CCP Calliope. And then it went to the events team, the team that I'm on. You make the like gameplay suggestion of, okay, could this work from a gameplay perspective, after it had already been determined that it could work from a product perspective and that it could work from a narrative perspective.
So there was basically a checkpoint. You feel confident that if Star Trek or Battlestar Galactica or whatever says we want to do it too, if like the timey-wimey nature of Doctor Who creates the reason why this works. Other IPs would not have that kind of justification. It wouldn't just be like,
not necessarily. I mean, Star Trek can be pretty timey-wimey too when it
that's fair. I mean,
but yeah, you're like, we would have to find a way that it fits if we wanted to do it.
But that's what you mean by it fitting. Was that like if there are certain canons that don't have justification,
and that like it's possible there could be certain IPs that we just decide are too divergent from Eve to fit. But that would just be a judgment call that gets made by the folks involved. So yeah, at any of those stages, if the product leadership thought it wasn't going to work out well for the product, if the narrative folks decided, you know what, this doesn't fit in the Eve universe, we can't do it. Or if the events team had decided, you know what, we can't come up with a good gameplay mechanic for this. It's not going to be fun for players. If at any of those stages we decided, you know what, this isn't going to work, then it wouldn't have happened. But we had those checkpoints. And so like the point where I first saw this was in December of 2020. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. So,
and at that point, it had already gotten looked at by the product leadership and the narrative team.
Right. So going back to like the technical improvements and use the events and all that sort of stuff. I'm actually just gonna. This is somewhat tangential, but like my biggest complaint for events, every single event, is the idea that you have to click the thing when you complete the task. Otherwise, you don't make any more progress until you do. We see the improvement with the doing damage instead of killing things. Have we made any progress on that front at all about like allowing tasks to not stop progress just because you didn't click?
It's a very valid concern. It's an issue that still exists for any task that gives you points, basically. We have the ability to, and there's some technical reasons for it. I'm sure we'll be able to solve them at some point, but we haven't solved them yet. Where at the moment, if it gives you points, you need to interact with it. But the way I've tried to design to make it less of a big deal for this one is that we never have two combat challenges in a row to give you points. So you'll see if you are looking at Obliques, the combat chain of challenges. It'll ask you to do things like kill one of the biomechanoid combat units, which are the little Daleks flying around on their side of the universe.
Right.
And that one doesn't have, you'll see when the event starts up, that one doesn't have any points assigned to it, so it'll just immediately go to the next one. And that's the do damage to the saucer one. So at the very least, I want to make sure that whenever possible, the points where you have to click are points where you're not distracted by something else.
That's good. Because, yeah, the issue was that, like, if I didn't click fast enough in step 1, then there aren't enough rats left for me to finish step 2, which means I get no credit for step 3. Now I have to do a whole nother site just to, like, I think during the winter event, on average, I did 2 sites for every 1 site worth of credit I got. So that's a huge...
It's definitely something that's on our list of things we want to get solved.
I was going to say, I'm sure they leave it in there. They just use me as a case study. They see how often I forget clicking that thing. They're like, oh, let's punish him until he learns. So that one's on me.
It's just for you, yeah.
But
we at the moment, until we get the technical fix, we're trying to work around it whenever possible with the season chain design.
Fair enough. I just wanted to touch on that. But like I said, it's obvious that you guys are playing around with the idea of like what you can use for events to mark progress. The idea of, the last blow thing was always a huge issue. So at least it's improved in that sense.
Yeah. Although, just quickly to clarify, when it's a kill the NPC, it's not last blow. It's top damage.
It's top damage, which is actually worse.
That is still in a lot of ways not ideal. So in this case, for this particular event, we have some kill the NPC tasks, but we intentionally chose NPCs where there's going to be multiple of them per site.
Right.
For that one. Because, and this is something that actually I realized I didn't make clear at the beginning, the combat parts of this event, the parts where you go in with a Tech 1 cruiser and have a combat encounter, all of them allow you either to have one person go in, you can go in alone, or you can bring one friend and go in with 2. So there's unlike the Abyss, there's no extra reward for bringing a second person. But we especially wanted to make sure we provided that option for folks because of the fact that we wanted this to be as new player friendly as possible. So the first combat encounter is easy enough that it should be soloable by somebody in their first week. Basically once you get medium guns and a Tech 1 cruiser, and if you know how to fit a repairer and just kind of fill up your slots, you should be able to beat that one. But if you want to make it even easier, bring a friend, whether it's a veteran player, somebody that maybe, hey, you've got a friend that plays Eve and you want to try it out with them, or another new player that you've met in a corp that you joined or something like that. There's the opportunity to do it with 2 people. And because of that, that's part of the reason that we wanted to prioritize switching it to the damage mechanic instead of to the kill for the saucers.
Right. And at the same time, you also make it so that you can't necessarily totally overwhelm the system because it's T1 cruisers only, right? So I can't bring in my Iki Tursa and just dunk it.
Yeah. I mean, if you want, we don't have many module limits, so if you want to bling, you can, but there's not as much of a benefit to that for just Tech 1 cruisers.
Yeah, that's only going to take you so far.
the goal, and we're still doing some balance tweaking based on our internal play testing, but the goal is for the final encounter to be pretty tough. The final encounter should be like, even for a veteran player, you may have a hard time beating it with a Tech 1 cruiser unless you bring a friend. We'll see whether we hit that as possible. Like, I'm sure our players will find a way to like run rings around this thing, and we'll be able to beat it in like a completely Tech 1 fit ship just for the swag points. But the goal is for it to be the top one to be pretty challenging. The first couple are much easier though.
Yeah, day one, Suetonia is gonna just have a guide on how to finish it in a stabber, and also just kill like 5 people on the way. So,
so there's a question that got brought up that I guess I'll bring up to you. Rushlock asked, what is the visibility of this event going to be? You know, it being in the agency can sometimes make it too difficult for people to find it or access it. Is there going to be, how are people going to see and interact with this event
in a similar way to our standard event? So you're right that this is something that we would like to increase our visibility of, but there's going to be like the login pop up for your first time you log in after the event starts with the window that like lets you click on it to get to the agency. There'll be the agency reward like points stuff and challenges in the sidebar on the left-hand side of the screen. And it's going to show up in the agency, of course. And like there's going to be a DLI, which pops up when you get into character selection. So there'll be opportunities for people to see it. But yes, improving visibility of events in general is something that we definitely want to work on. I have a dream of setting up a like dedicated event section of the agency and then being able to hook that into a bunch of things to make it much easier to navigate and more visible, because at the moment, a lot of our stuff is kind of spread across different parts of the agency.
Right.
But yeah, for this event, it'll be pretty similar to what you saw with the exposure of, say, the Winter Nexus. It'll be about that visible.
Right. So, for instance,
also to quickly answer one question that came up I saw in chat before I forget, the Vedmak is not allowed. So it's just the basic Empire Tech 1 cruisers. So no faction cruisers and no advanced like Trigavian or Edencom.
And also no Navy.
Yeah, no Navy. It's just the combat and attack Tech 1 cruisers. The filament, when you pop it up the window, will actually list all the ships that's allowed. It's just the basic combat and attack Tech 1 cruisers for each empire.
So also, I noticed that there's kind of 2 filament types. There's a combat filament, but then there's what appears to be pretty clearly a relic site filament.
Yes. Yeah, so there is 4 different combat filaments, and there are 3 different relic site filaments. So there's going to be a relic site that appears in the normal probe scanner, and you can probe down with normal probes, and that's the entry point to the event. That's going to appear in all areas of space, K-space, and wormholes. But there's also going to be the relic sites in Doctor Who space that you can build filaments to get to. And the first filament you can build actually is going to be the one that is going to be a relic site. We really liked that both as a way of continuing the focus on exploration for this event, and making it something that is easy for, again, a new player to try out, but also it lets you check out the really cool visuals without having the time pressure of stuff shooting at you. Those sites are not going to have any hostile NPCs in them, so they're a very chill way of like checking out the audio cues that our audio folks made for it, checking out the nebulas, and learn some of the effects of these environments, because this is a whole different universe. There are some different things happening there. For instance, one thing that is unique to this event that we're trying out for the first time is the pocket you go to in Doctor Who's universe has a barrier, or it has a limit to where you can travel. Just because you need that technically, but it isn't a damaging one like the Abyss. Instead, it's toroidal space, which felt very Doctor Who to us. When you go off one end, you appear at the opposite end, like Pac-Man.
Oh man, I'm going to have a lot of fun with that.
And that's something you can absolutely take advantage of in combat, because you can use it to hop around the arena and like the gameplay space and get somewhere much faster if you kind of think using. Are we
going to get a PvP arena that does that during the Doctor Who event?
Maybe someday, not for this event, but if people like it,
that's the right time to do it.
Might give it a try.
Don't worry, Ash. I'm gonna make sure that this gets into the Alliance tournament somehow, so no one can ever boundary again.
CC Swift's one-man crusade against boundary violations.
Yeah.
I can't imagine why you'd feel that way.
You can also, the NPCs also you take it, like unlike the damage thing in the Abyss where we have to have the NPCs like not go through the barrier, the NPCs will totally just sail on through the barrier and teleport to the other side too. So like they can follow you through, although they're not all that smart about it, but they have momentum. But also you can just like hang out near the edge, and if they're orbiting you, they'll teleport. So there's really cool ways to take advantage of it. And that's kind of thing you can explore in a very casual, non-threatening way in the exploration version of these pockets. And then you can try it out in combat later.
So that hitting the idea of a non-threatening abyssal or like, you know, a pocket like that, obviously the Abyss as an instanced PvE has always been controversial. And there's always been people that continue to complain that this is not an acceptable thing. I've always argued that the instanced PvE allows you to demand their full attention while they are, you know, going through the encounter. What would you say to people that like have a problem with the idea of a instanced relic site? Like, is that necessary? Why is that necessary?
So I think it's a valid concern. I think in general, people's concerns about this are valid. You need to I think there's a role that instance spaces can play in a game like Eve, and obviously there's versions of it before the Abyss, like keyed dungeons with acceleration gates, and that have been in the game since 2003. But it's some kind of thing you have to use carefully. I'd say, in general, this is not the kind of thing we would have done for just any content. The fact that it's a limited time thing makes it much more reasonable for us to do, and the fact that it's this Doctor Who universe crossover thing meant that was by far the most natural way to make it fit within our universe. So yeah, I'd say I think it's a valid concern, and that we are keeping it in mind, and we'll be like, both this is a limited time thing, and also we'll keep an eye on how it works out. Like there's always the concern that you'd be able to use it to escape and spend like half an hour in this space and then come back. So that's the kind of thing that we would be much more worried about if A, this allowed a larger selection of ships in, or B, if it was a long-term thing instead of only lasting a few weeks.
Right. So is there timers? The phrasing of it seems to suggest like normally these pockets have a timer, but this one does not. So when you go in, there's no timer?
There is a timer. Yeah.
Oh, there is a timer.
It's got a half-hour timer.
Oh, okay, cool. So I see. So there is a timer, but it's extended, right?
Yeah, and you don't have the stuff shooting at you. I mean, you could also just do that in like a tier 0 Abyss or something.
I'm just saying, like the verbiage of the actual filament itself talks about like the entanglement of your warp core and how it normally does it, but this makes it more resistant. So I wasn't sure if it meant that there was a timer or not. So it sounds like there is a timer, but it's a longer one.
Yep.
Okay. Is that true about the combat site too?
Yes. Yeah, they both have a half-hour timer on them.
So would you say that the relic site being used through filaments and therefore instances, is that like a design reason, or is it more, it felt to me like the important thing here is to keep, again, the Eve universe sacred, like lock it off. Like the reason why you use this filament to go to the relic site isn't necessarily because you want an instance relic site, but rather it needs to be that way so that way you are going somewhere else and not it coming here.
Yeah, that's something that kind of emerged naturally as we were working on the design. In the first version of it, the idea was to just have the first relic site in normal space. This first relic site is not in Doctor Who's space. It's not like you warp into Doctor Who space or anything like that. It's a spot in the Eve universe where essentially wormholes you can't traverse have popped up from Doctor Who space, and they're spitting out some wrecks that you can, or some objects you can use a relic analyzer on. The original plan was to just have that and then the combat stuff, but which would then be through the filaments. But it kind of emerged naturally as we continued working on the design, and as we realized that we wanted this to be a very exploration focused event, to set up exploration versions of the pockets as well.
It also, I mean, like just from a game design perspective, it kind of makes sense, like as a tutorial, right? Like the first time you go use the filament, it's a very non-threatening way. But next time Next time it's going to be harsh. So learn the learn how it works now.
And the way we have it set up is the first filament you can build is the one that takes you to the first exploration pocket. And then from there, you're going to actually have a chance of getting 2 different types of blueprints. And obviously you run it enough times, you can get more than that, like a bunch of each. But the tier 2 level of encounters includes the next combat one, or the first combat one, and the next exploration one, and then the top tier ones are combat only. But there's essentially a split progression where you can follow the exploration tier, and you can just run that if you want. If you're just into exploration, you just want to chill, like hacking experience. There's going to be like a dozen containers in a lot of these, so you can spend a bit of time hacking and checking out the sites. Then you can just do that.
Was there ever a consideration to use like wormholes rather than filaments to make it more like people can journey to this other place rather than straight up instancing it?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Was there a consideration to use wormholes rather than filaments to make it so that people can go to a different place through traversing wormholes rather than using a filament that would be fully instanced?
We didn't end up, I'd say that wasn't really a serious consideration because we knew early on that we were going to have to put limits on what you can do in the Doctor Who space, much more significant limits than what we allow you to do in a wormhole. You're being plopped down near, actually, I think we've already said it in the promo stuff, near Gallifrey. So it's got all this Doctor Who storyline stuff and baggage attached with that, which is really cool, but also means that things start to get weird from the BBC's lore's perspective. They also need to keep their stuff sacred to a certain degree. So we needed to make sure that there was some limits placed. In the same way as there's limits on what the Doctor Who elements, how much that can affect Eve, there's also limits of how much we can affect them. Because this is also, like, it is canon in both. So we need to keep that in mind when we're doing the design.
I'm glad that you just brought that up. So yesterday, among the things that happened during the discussion, we had CCP Explorer, I think, tweet that like not every event is canon. And he brought up the Yule Lads as an example, and I shot back, but there is a canonical thing about Yule, and he's like, no, not the Yule clones, the new iteration, but specifically the 2012 video that has like the Yule Lads and Santa. Just because that video exists doesn't mean that Santa is canonically part of the New Eden universe. That being said, the use of the word event was very concerning to a lot of people. So let's just point to that directly.
Yep, I can totally understand why that's concerning to folks. And for that very reason, this is another one of the topics that I made sure to have a sync up with Delegate Zero about before coming on this show. And he gave me the go-ahead to reiterate the position that has already been communicated by him before and by our narrative folks before, that stuff that happens in-game is canon. So in-game events are canon.
So we're not going to get, because that was my biggest fear. Like, I'm okay with this timey-wimey explanation and trying to work around it. The idea of just being like, yeah, this didn't technically happen, and that being a thing that we have in the game, I think that would be significantly more destructive. To just be like, and now there are things that happened that didn't actually happen.
Our narrative folks share the same position on that. Yeah, it's the word events that Explorer was using is kind of speaking more broadly than in-game events. Yeah, stuff that is happening in the client is canon.
Right.
It might be canon in ways that has limited effect in the future, like this Doctor Who event, where it's canon, but also the knock-on effects are intentionally set up to be very limited. But it is still canon.
Right. So not all events, i.e. things that CCP does, are necessarily canonical, because you can make videos and other stuff like that. But any event, capital E, that happens in Eve happens. That's basically where we're drawing the line. Got it. Thank you for that clarification. I think that is important for a lot of people. Shoot, I had another thing that I wanted to say about these things, but I don't remember what it was now. So let's see. What else do I want to talk about?
I mean, to answer Machinista there, Chesser is canon because he's an Eve character. So
Oh,
Eve characters are canon. Yeah.
The example-
all your 100% of your characters are canon.
yeah. The example that I brought up yesterday is the Aether Wars event, right? The Aether Wars.
Yeah, that would be
happened.
another example of something that's not canon. Yeah.
No, it
'cause
is. It happened. Like the skin points to it. Like the Garistas did a thing in the Abyss, but it wasn't literally the Aether Wars thing. But we experienced
There
an
was
event
stuff
that
was
happened
happening,
canonically
but
in the universe.
If the actions you took in that other game demo
Right.
are not canon in the same way the actions you take within the Eve client are.
So Nth Dimensional asks, can you do the event solely in a combat ship, or at least, or do I have to do exploration?
Somebody has to do exploration, but you don't have to. So you can buy the filaments or buy the materials and do the industry yourself if you want. The filaments are fully tradable, and yeah, you can absolutely just say, I just want to run some combat sites in Tech 1 Cruiser and buy the filament from somebody else who built it. But somebody at an earlier stage of the chain has to have done exploration and sold
similar
it.
in that way to the Abyss, right? Like you have to find the first abyssal filament somewhere else. Then that abyssal filament gives you potentially another higher level abyssal filament, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, except that in the Abyss, you could kind of just continue infinitely chaining. I mean, you could continue infinitely chaining the Abyss just running the combat, right? Because you get the fully built filaments. In this case, somebody at some point has to do industry. So you get materials and blueprints that you can do industry, or you can sell it and somebody else can do it. And at the earliest stages, somebody has to be doing exploration. So that's an opportunity. I'm not super worried about the supply of the stuff from the case-based site. This thing is going to be like everywhere. So, and it's very easy to probe and very accessible. So we expect there to be a glut of those materials.
So also we have a question from Fonsui, who, as many people know, is a very technical, execution-focused person. So his question is, can you confirm that the reason why the saucers are enormous, orbit at 10 kilometers, and chase you at 4,000 meters per second and pin you down with a 95% web is that way new bros don't accidentally out-track themselves?
So they have a really big signature, which is mainly to prevent new players from out-tracking themselves. So the saucers are really easy to track. The little combat units are not nearly as easy to track, so I do recommend bringing either a good tracking or a web, or both. But the saucer is pretty easy to hit. The one thing that you'll notice if you look at the stats carefully, I don't know if we've ever done this with an NPC before, but these saucers use a grappler. They have a short range web that has fall off. So it's a 95% for the top tier ones, but only at like actual optimal, which is like 1 kilometer or something. And then it trails off. So that's another one of those cases where we're experimenting a bit with seeing how this gameplay feels for folks.
Right. Okay, so a couple of other questions just to go over it. I know we kind of touched on it, but just to nail it down, there are various skins. There's the Red Force, there's the Warp Convergence, and there's the Interstellar Convergence. So the base one, the below battleship one, is part of the reward track, or just part of like drop in the sites?
The Warp Convergence skins for the ships smaller than battleships, so those are dropped from the sites only. So the only way to get those, you can buy them from other players, but the source of them in the game is from the sites, both the exploration and the combat sites. And then you can trade them. The Red Force and Blue Force skins, those ones come from the daily login and from the season reward track.
Oh, okay. So the Red Force that's the actual like event meta reward. The Warp Convergence are the drops. Interstellar Convergence is tied specifically to like Plex deals and stuff like that. Is that correct?
Yeah, those ones are being monetized. Yeah, so that's our usual pattern with these events: is there'll be some skins set aside for the monetization team and some skins set aside for the events team. So in this case, the Warp Convergence is the drop skins. The Red Force and Blue Force are the progression and login skins, and the Interstellar Convergence is the sale skins. But the Interstellar Convergence and the Warp Convergence are fully tradable on the market because they're sales and drops, so you can just buy them from other folks if you want.
So up until this point, we've kind of danced around the details of the story and justification of what's going on. But one of the big concerns that I've heard a lot is, you've assured that this will wrap up in such a way that like it cleanly ends and doesn't come back. This is not a repeating event. It's not going to happen every January. Can you give us?
No, it's not going to happen every January. I mean, I can't rule out that we might ever do something like this again, but if so, we would always be like making those decisions in a way that the creative team considers appropriate, right? But we have no plans to bring it back.
So can you give us
not going to be a yearly recurrent thing.
Can you give us an idea as to why after 3 weeks it just resolves itself, or is that something we're going to have to wait and see?
We're using one of the easiest writing shorthands in science fiction. A unexplained natural phenomena is allowing this to happen, and it will disappear for unexplained reasons.
I mean, it really feels like it's just a Doctor Who episode that we're just the victim, right? We're getting ripped into their episode, and then when the episode's over, it's over. They move on to the next crisis.
So like from the Capsuleer perspective, what happens is Association for Interdisciplinary Research. There we go. That's the words I'm looking for. AIR will detect that there is some weird stuff happening that they can't explain and ask players to go investigate it. And when you investigate it, you will find the relic sites, and from there, your ship systems are able to extrapolate blueprints, and you collect materials that can then be used to build filaments that work while this natural phenomena is happening. Once the natural phenomena is over and the universes diverge again, then the filaments no longer work.
It's like a grand conjunction sort of deal.
Yeah, the travel between the universes requires both technological work from the in-universe capsuleers, and it requires a natural event to be happening as well.
Right. What the description describes like a space-time knot. So it sounds like some event happened previous to the Time War that basically caused what I call the temporal implosion, pulling things from all different kinds of space-time places to one focus. Is that pretty much what we're looking at?
So, I mean, I don't want to put words into the BBC's mouth on that. So they own that side of it. What we've done is intentionally, and with their blessing, we've made this environment on the other side somewhat non-distinct. And yes, it has a bunch of stuff in it that doesn't necessarily fall into any given timeline. Like they're from in their universe. There's things you will see that if you're a Doctor Who fan, you'll be like, oh, I recognize that, I recognize that, but actually those didn't happen at the same time. And there'll be some things that are visible that only happened after the Time War and stuff like that. So yes, there is absolutely something going on that causes that to happen. The details of that is something that is up to the BBC, whether they want to share or not, and what they exactly want to write about it.
So
that also is why, for instance, we didn't have to limit ourselves to objects that refer or to wink at any one iteration of the Doctor. We have clothing items, for instance, from 3 separate Doctors. There's in-game, there's like novelty trinkets that refer to other characters from different different points of the show.
Right.
So we didn't have to limit ourselves to one point in the timeline for that.
Right. Shoot. So you mentioned that this is a cross-promotional event. Should we expect something from the BBC side? Is there going to be an episode about this? Or is it only taking part? Is it only us that are doing it? No,
yeah. So you shouldn't expect an episode, at least, I mean, maybe someday, but no, not as part of this. What the BBC is doing is sharing it on all of their normal ways they communicate with their fans. So their website has the webpage about it, a section. They're sharing it with all their fans on social media and stuff like that. So it's that kind of cross-promotional thing. I know there's some people that have speculated about it. The title of the Doctor Who Christmas/New Year's episode this year is a coincidence. That is not something that like they did for us, though it does work out really coolly. It's called Eve of the Daleks. That is 100% coincidence. It is just a happy little coincidence.
Right. So the cross promotion is the fact that having a Doctor Who thing happening in EVE Online is useful for raising the awareness of both Doctor Who and EVE Online without anything extra doing it. Like just the fact that you're doing the cross.
Both companies are doing all of their normal ways of communicating it. It's like talking to media and talking on their social channels and putting up websites and all that stuff.
When I looked at it, one of the things I noticed about the rewards is that it's very clear that we're not promoting like the latest season of Doctor Who. This isn't like, go check out what's going on. These are the most iconic pieces. It's like, I actually kind of called it fan service for a different IP, right? Like it's these very iconic pieces of the Doctor Who franchise, rather than, getting people caught up on what's actually happening in Doctor Who or anything like that.
Yeah. So this doesn't take place at any specific, like this doesn't take place during like certain episode of the show or anything like that. There's no direct connections like that. You do not, and like, it's not going to be a surprise to people, you do not interact with the Doctor as part of this. I was going to ask that next, yeah. It is not something that's that specific. The BBC did ask for us to mention in the press stuff that takes place before the Time War, and I'll leave it up to them what they want to do with that. If they want to do anything in the future with it, they're absolutely welcome to, of course, because they own everything that happens on their side of the universe. But we didn't, like, we basically just made it as non-specific as possible when it came to like placing assets in space and such.
Right. Man, we've talked about a lot already. I think I've gone through all of my questions. Let me double check.
And yeah, so there is, I'd say we probably, when it comes to the eras, yeah, it absolutely is a mix. There's some, like there's the t-shirt in the clothing items is the part of the Jodie Whittaker costume. The suit is part of the Matt Smith costume. The scarf, like we've got elements mostly from the revived show, but a bit from the pre 2000s iteration. Specifically the Matt Baker scarf and the jelly babies. There's a sweet jelly confectionery trinket item.
Yep. And there's a broken sonic screwdriver and some other things that I think are kind of cool. So I guess one other thing about like the lore and whatnot, like obviously it's kind of been isolated as its own thing. Do you know if there's any plans to, like, the fact that this happened be a thing? Like, will it be later seen as just like another example of like Triglavian space-time manipulation causing damage to local space-time, and this is just one manifestation of it, like a filament, or metaliminal storms? Or is this more like, we're just probably going to be like, that was a weird thing that happened once?
So I'll say we're leaving ourselves just open to the future for that. The default is kind of, that was weird. But if a good opportunity comes up to do something with it that the narrative folks want to do, they absolutely can. And we're working with them to make sure that stays open and just not cut off any possibilities in the future.
Yeah, the narrative team is quite creative when it comes to things like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. What did you guys expect the response to this announcement to be?
The way I described it internally is I expected it to be mixed with a higher intensity on the negative side. And I think that was fairly accurate. The assumption, the hope, is that there'll be a noticeable set of new players that come try out the game, and that, of course, whenever we do that, whenever the new players come into the game, some percentage of them decide that this is a good game that they like, and they stick around. There's going to be, and we're hoping that the event is good enough and that it fits into the universe well enough that folks that have concerns will, when they give it a try, maybe decide it's not that bad. Of course, obviously that's subjective, so I'm not gonna be offended if anyone hates it. You're absolutely welcome to. The assumption from CCP side, business wise, is that it's a total positive, that it would grow the game in the net.
Right.
But obviously there's going to be folks that aren't fans.
Right. The hope would be that there's probably going to be more people that are fans that aren't EVE players yet than there are people that are mad enough.
And of course, there's also just people that either don't care either way and just it's an event for them, but who like doing events. And there's going to be people who are existing Eve players who are Doctor Who fans, which is, of course, like as two big sci-fi properties, there's definitely a lot of overlap there.
I've definitely seen a lot of people like that. It's like, while everybody else is complaining, they're like, no, I want the scarf, man. Screw you. I just want to, like, I don't care what justification it takes. I want to have a scarf.
There's also going to be, I'm sure, people that just don't know anything about Doctor Who, but still want the scarf.
That actually has also been true.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we were actually, it was quite funny. Like, I think Fozzie was mentioning there are areas of the world that don't really have any Doctor Who. So a lot of our, like, Russian players, Korean players, Japanese players, they're not really familiar with Doctor Who. Some of the responses are literally Doctor Who, like question mark, like they don't get it, but they are still interested, or hopefully will be very interested and captivated by the event sites anyways. So you don't really need any Doctor Who knowledge to enjoy it.
And that's that
I think
crossover.
if you're coming at it from just an Eve perspective, I think people will be pretty impressed with the visuals in this. One thing that I mentioned earlier on the stream, right? We were careful about the visuals and how on the nose to be with anything that was going to come back to the Eve universe. But kind of the flip side of that is we could be a little bit more free with the art direction on the Doctor Who side of the portal. So there's some pretty cool stuff there that you don't normally get the opportunity to see visual wise in Eve Online. I'm generally a pretty big fan of getting more color expansion into the game, but I know that's different people have different opinions, and that's totally fine. There's more color in this. There's more color in this world, in this Eve version of the Doctor Who universe than in the normal Eve universe. So it, I think, is a pretty cool visual treat for folks.
Right. And so again, so there's two manifestations of this kind of complaint that I see. The first one being that idea of the sacredness of the canon, but more importantly, just like, however you explain it or not, this is a clear change in how CCP is willing to interact with their IP and willing to allow their IP to be part of and not part of. This was really brought home by the fact that the former CCP Falcon was very vocal about not liking this change. And he represents kind of he was very much a caretaker of the old school way of thinking about the lore. So this clearly does, like, it's a symptom of a change. What do you say to those people that may not be happy with the fact that the way that the lore is being treated has changed? How is it being treated now?
So I guess what I'd say is, first, you're like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with having that opinion. I'm not going to say that your opinion is wrong in this. It's a subjective thing. I like Falcon is a great guy who understands Eve lore as well as almost anyone, and that is a perfectly valid opinion to have. Secondly, I think one thing I'd say that hopefully makes it feel a little bit better is that it isn't a sharp night and day difference. This is a question of this might be the kind of thing that we could have approved in the past if the potential, if the deal
under the right conditions
been presented in those times.
Sure.
But also, we've always had nods to other fictional properties in the game, to the real world. Things like the monolith, right, have been in the game since the beginning as a 2001 Easter egg. So we've had a lot of Easter eggs in the game before. Obviously, this is something different than that, but it's not something where we're taking it from a complete lockdown to opening it up. It's always been something that has some flow of content from other fictional properties and from the real world.
Right.
It's just a question of what is, we're always trying to make judgment calls about what is appropriate and what isn't. And again, as I mentioned kind of at the beginning, what will be left in the Eve universe after this event is over, and honestly, what is known in universe is much more of the type of a Easter egg than it is something like a new direction being written to the canon. What you're actually seeing is essentially a really big, really intense Easter egg from the in-universe perspective. We can talk about it being Daleks, but players don't know that. In the same way as we can talk about the fact that Tom's shuttle is a reference to David Bowie, but the players in game don't know that. We can talk about the fact the monolith is a 2001: A Space
we know that
reference, but the players don't know that.
Yeah, this is all happening in our
characters
mind.
in the Eve universe.
Yeah,
and so there is a similarity there. This is obviously bigger, but it's not something completely unprecedented.
Okay, so the other big complaint, if we can separate them out, is the notion of why this first, right? So we have everything from the Edencom and the Triglavian people that are like, wait, we've been waiting for a lore movement, and the first lore thing that happens is this, Doctor Who thing, all the way to people, again, cat ears, skins, that kind of stuff. Like, for years, we've been told that things like cat ears are completely inappropriate for EVE Online. It doesn't fit the motif. But now we have bow ties and Fourth Doctor scarves, right? What do you say to people that are like, wait, why are we getting that when we've been told that we're not allowed to have these things that canonically exist in the universe?
Yep. I think, I guess one thing I would say is that different people are, again, completely open, or it's completely appropriate for different people to have different opinions on what is appropriate and what isn't. Personally, I'm not the person who makes any of these decisions, but I'm absolutely pro cat ears. Like, I don't see why not. But obviously, that's something that at the moment we've decided that might change. But at the moment, the leadership, for like their absolutely valid reasons, have decided isn't appropriate.
Team cat ears.
But they've decided a bow tie is, and like I think again, it's a subjective thing, which is more kind of extreme, a bow tie or cat ears, but it's a perfectly valid opinion to have that the bow tie is less extreme.
I think that's the most positive thing that you've said. Like, that's gotten the most positive response out of chat of anything that you've said today.
I'm very much of the opinion that Eve is a dystopian piece of fiction, but that having colorful elements doesn't necessarily have to take away from that.
Well, the Galente use these colorful elements as a distraction from the dystopia. It's the opiate of the masses, right? Like, it's the and
for the same reason, I'm generally more so than maybe some other people at the company pro colorful skins and stuff like that, right? Like, you can be a mass murderer with a pink skin, and it doesn't make you any less of a mass murderer. So I don't really see the conflict there, but also it's a fully valid. I can absolutely see why people have different opinions on that, right? Like why they think that the visual tone needs to match the kind of like Blade Runner-esque inspiration for the game. Completely, absolutely valid opinion. And different people have different opinions. We've had different art directors over the years who have had who've like decided the line is in different places, and that's perfectly normal for a product that's running this long. So it'll probably keep changing over the years. It might start going in the opposite direction. It might go like there's a bunch of things that could happen. Who knows? When it comes to questions of like lore, why this lore? I'll say there's not a lot of effort put into we didn't need to put a ton of work into the lore for this, as when it comes to like the amount of time and effort required for the narrative folks for like this compared to like doing something new with like permanent serious lore with the empires or the like Triglavians or Edencom. There's no comparison. This is much simpler, partly because it's temporary, partly because most of our lore is just nobody knows what this is, which is really easy to write. So like our narrative folks are much more focused on, for instance, the next stages of the NPE, which does have much more intense and significant lore work that's needed versus this. But also we've done a lot. It's not like we haven't been doing stuff with the established Eve lore in the Eve universe with the empires over the last year. I think I'm very proud of the work that we've been able to do with the narrative folks on the events team over especially the last summer. Introducing things like the Empire focused events, all the stuff we were able to do with Liberation Games and Liberation Day, the videos that we were able to get produced. There's a lot of really cool stuff happening in lore, stuff like the lore portal.
Yes, that's really cool.
Yeah, so there's a lot of good, like the amount of work that it took to polish all of the stuff up needed for the lore portal for Delegate Zero is vastly larger than the amount of work that was needed for this event. So there's no like either or. This is a little thing that fits in between the big projects like the lore portal.
Right. And like I said, it functions as a good low primary effort thing that can be something going on during this time that doesn't require that much consideration and effort from a CCP side of things, but also, like, to be totally honest, a fair chunk of the effort is quote unquote outsourced because BBC provides certain resources.
We get essentially the leg up because of that.
Right. So, people keep on asking like, why did you need to do this? And it's not even like that you needed to do it. You didn't pursue it. It was like the opportunity was made available, and therefore, why shouldn't we do it? What would make it not be a good thing to do? Nothing makes it a bad thing to do, and therefore we do it. Is that pretty much?
Yeah, I mean, like we looked at the opportunities available and decided that the benefits outweighed the costs, and that is just kind of the way we approach most of our events. I mean, most of our features, honestly, is you look at what the opportunities available for you are, what the effect you think it'll have on the game, and how much time and effort it'll require, what potential downsides there are to the game, and you just try to make your best judgment call. And
Right.
obviously, we're never going to get it 100% right. It's possible that this ends up not bringing in very many people and ends up not being worth it, but that's a risk you always take with any feature.
Yeah, and that will be a learning. Like if
Yeah.
it turns out to be that's something that we've learned in the process. And the learning something is always good. Also, just for people who are like concerned about this event or worried about it for whatever reasons, I also strongly encourage you to give it a shot. Just try it out to see what it's going to be like. I know when you read the headline, Eve Online crossover with Doctor Who, you think, oh, they're going to turn in like a spaceship into the TARDIS. Daleks going to be a playable race or something like that. No, it's like a very well thought out in lore type event.
Relatively conservative, all things considered.
Yeah,
I think that's a fair assessment. Yeah,
and like very considered as well.
Garov asks in chat, will CSP actively search for more crossover opportunities in the near future? I mean, the honest answer is those kind of discussions happen way above either myself or Swift's pay grade. So not that we know of, but we wouldn't necessarily know of it.
But it doesn't seem like there's like, oh my God, this is the new way we got to do things. Like, let's find new opportunities. It really was like
this is a project that was like sitting on the back burner for a while, and then a good time slot happened to fit for it. And so we went forward with it.
And I'm sure that these kinds of things are always, marketing teams are always working up some hustle, right? Like, oh, we got a license to make a TV series, or we got a thing to do this, or, whatever. Like, there's always like these half-baked ideas that are being cooked. It's just, you never know which one is going to percolate enough to, take into real consideration. So that kind of question almost becomes moot, because it's less about like how much are they being pursued and more about like how many barriers are required before something is actually acceptable. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure that the folks in our senior leadership we would take Paramount's call if they wanted to chat about Star Trek. I can say that pretty safely, that if they like called, we would answer. But then whether that would actually happen would entirely depend on what the details would be.
The best one I've heard was the idea that like the only other entity that I could think of that could like interact with our universe in the same way that Doctor Who could would be Doctor Strange, right? So like you could definitely do a crossover with Marvel if for some reason Disney wants to like take pity on you guys. But I mean, outside of that, I don't see these things like, jumping.
Yeah,
I said yesterday, hold on. I said yesterday that I would kill the lore for a Stargate crossover. Sorry, what?
I'm sure Disney could just make an MMO as a rounding error on their budget, so they can.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I would unironically burn the lore to the ground for a Stargate crossover, just for the record. Have I ever heard of Q? Good point. So speaking of lore and violations and concerns and breaches and all that kind of stuff, in the previous Rogue Drone event, I've been meaning to actually pin you down about this now that I think about it.
Okay, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
so.
you already know exactly where I'm going with this.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a bunch of records that were dropped by the Rogue Drones. There were logs that we intercepted. All of the interceptions were in binary, translated into Russian/Slavic. However,
Czech specifically.
Czech, sorry, yes. But this wasn't because the Rogue Drones were Triglavian necessarily, but it's actually because all of them were quotes from a play that was written originally in Czech, which happens to be the very first time that the word robot was, that's where the word robot comes from, right?
Yes. Yeah. Rossum's Universal Robots is the English translation of the name. Yeah, it's it's essentially just a bit of fun sci-fi history.
Right. but the issue is that like while most of the play itself is a conversation between robots, so as far as intercepted messages, all but one of the messages really kind of work as just like, oh, these are rogue drones talking to each other about their existence. But one of them specifically references a real life earthly event within the text. You have been driving me up the wall for the last like month and a half or so because of this. Like, can you give me any clarity whatsoever as to like how I should like interpret that?
I think you should interpret them all as quotes from the play.
But the rogue drones have access to the play?
They have gained access to the play, yes.
Okay.
Or at least in part. They may not have the whole thing.
Still bizarre, but at least that gives me a direction.
Yeah. Basically, it's so, and this is something that's established in the Eve lore, not specifically this play, but that there are bits and pieces of history,
fragments
and
of culture
from old Earth that survived the collapse, and some groups and entities within the Eve universe may have more access to some of that and have lost less of it than others. There's that like a lot of stuff like the almost all the ships named after animals. Those animals are considered mythical by denizens of New Eden, but there is reference to bits and pieces of history and culture from old Earth in New Eden. It is intended to be in a fictional version of our future.
Okay, so this isn't like, because it started to feel like this was multiple instances of, you know, that boundary of, you know, reality in the game becoming permeable. But you're saying that there is some kind of justification for it, at least.
Yeah, I mean, it's at the end of the day the same justification for why there's like a ship called the Raven, in that there is a bits of concepts from the real world have survived through the travel to the Eve Gate and did not all get lost in the fall afterwards in the collapse.
I find it difficult to believe that play would survive the collapse and not something with such good marketing skills as like Hello Kitty. Like, you would think that like if anything survives the collapse, there'd be like some icon of Hello Kitty that gets worshipped by some, you know, fallen culture, because there's so much Hello Kitty merchandise. Just throwing that out there, I guess.
Interestingly enough, one of the members of CSM, I think 4, 5, and 6, maybe even 7 as well, Trevor Dedro, I don't know if you guys remember him. He, in his real life, was involved with the Sanrio Corporation. I think he did all of the licensing of Sanrio stuff for the US markets.
Yes.
So if you're playing 6 Degrees of Hello Kitty, you're like really close. But not close enough.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, from an out of universe perspective, I can say that there's a very different thing in putting in bits and pieces of a public domain play.
That's fair.
Versus using another corporation's IP. But and also that like this wasn't intended to be something that is teaching you something entirely new about the Eve universe. It was intended to be something fun that fit in the already established knowledge that some bits and which bits can be like, there may be unknown reasons why some survived and not others. But some bits of old Earth culture made it through in some form.
And things like this happening, like the Doctor Who event, really, like in the broadest context, all it really represents from a New Eden perspective is that reality itself is starting to break down thanks to the machinations of the Triglavians and Concord and all these people. Like it's literally doing damage to the fabric of space-time and causing things to happen that wouldn't happen under normal conditions. And this is just
I
one
won't confirm or
manifestation
deny
of that.
whether those are connected in any way, partly because we want to leave the most options open for our narrative folks. But yeah, that is a perfectly valid interpretation someone could have. And again, for anyone that missed the beginning of this stream, to be clear, one of the questions that we've seen come up a few times that we answered at the beginning, this crossover does not mean that the Doctor universe and the Eve universe are the same universe at different points in the timeline. Like, the Doctor can't just be around at any point in the Eve universe using time travel. These are two different universes that are temporarily becoming having a limited interaction that will then no longer be possible once the event is over.
So parallel realities confirmed, but Doctor Who lives in the Eve universe not confirmed. Yeah, that was. I mean, there's YouTube channels like Game Theory and stuff like that, where as soon as you get one crossover thingy, it's like, oh, and now it means all of these other things because, every implication of Doctor Who also is an implication of evil. And that is just
nope. The physics. I mean, one thing that you would that anyone who pays attention to this would already know is that the physics of the at least the Eve cluster is not entirely the same as the physics of our modern world.
Absolutely.
So whether that's a different world, different universe, or different part of space having different physics, that is, I think, not something that we've confirmed one way or another. But the physics of Doctor Who universe is not the same as the physics of Eve. The stuff that Doctor Who can do and that the characters in the Doctor can do and the other characters in Doctor Who can do, that is not necessarily stuff that is possible in the Eve universe.
Right. So we're coming up near to the 2-hour mark, which you guys kind of suggested would be the comfortable period. Is there anything that we've missed or we want to dig into before that happens?
Let me see. I'll take a quick look through my chat with Delegate Zero, see if there's anything that we talked about that we've missed. Oh, I saw one thing come up. Somebody mentioned NFTs again in chat here. This is like probably someone again who missed the beginning of the stream. At the beginning of the stream, we did confirm there's no NFTs involved with this project, and this is not connected to the NFT project that the BBC is doing separately from us. This is its own thing, and there are no NFTs in this.
Exactly what Fozzie said.
Yeah. One thing too that I talked to Delegate Zero that he wanted to make clear to answer your question. Although the gameplay mechanics have some similarities to Abyssal Dead Space, this is not Abyssal Dead Space you're going into.
Oh, that reminds me.
Not the Doctor Who space is not the same thing as Abyssal Dead Space.
Are there going to be like a weather effect inside of there?
There is no weather effect.
Okay.
One thing I actually, to end the stream off, I can tell you about one other interesting thing that is a part of this event that we haven't mentioned yet, but that is in the Sissy files. But yeah, there's no weather effect. There's a boundary, but it's not a damage boundary. It's a teleport boundary. There's obviously some gameplay similarities, but it's not Abyssal Dead Space. You're not going to the Abyss. This is not like a different part of the Abyss or anything. It is its own thing. The other thing, the thing I can say is, one thing I mentioned that I saw some people sharing around, as I mentioned, there's no time travel as a part of this event, but there is time dilation. Or something like time dilation, which is obviously something that already exists in the Eve universe.
Right.
But it felt like a pretty cool thing to explore as part of this Doctor Who stuff. So what we did was we've created some new objects that will appear in known space as part of the relic sites, but then they'll go away after that. They're kind of a part of the things that spill into the Eve universe temporarily, but then they also exist in large numbers in this Doctor Who space. They are objects called the accelerant and decelerant nexuses.
I saw those,
and they're essentially natural mines, for lack of a better term. They are objects that when you approach them and you get close enough, they will explode. And instead of doing damage, they will apply an effect to your ship. And the accelerant ones just kind of make everything faster. And the decelerant ones kind of make everything slower. They speed up or slow down your ship. They speed up and slow down every module cycle time. They speed up or slow down cap regen. They speed up, like they
Can you lure the bad guys into it?
Stuff. Sorry?
Can you lure the bad guys into it to make them affected by it?
No, they only trigger on capsuleer ships. For, in practice, technical reasons, come up with some.
Well, I was just trying to say, like, if there is a thing that slows you down, it sounds like that would objectively be bad.
What you could do is you can lure other players into them in the relic sites if you want. They don't like it. It's not like terrible the effect, although it is something that will would absolutely be a bummer for a minute if you got it in PvP. So that's one of those things where we wanted to explore the kind of like the feel of how does this feel from a player perspective, see what works and what doesn't, and then we wouldn't bring back this particular thing to another event, but we could bring back the concept of thing that you approach and that applies a buff or a debuff to you if you approach it.
So, but okay, help square the circle then. no time travel. We exist 20,000 years in the future. The event is said to take place 400 years before the Time War. Huh? Like, how does that work without time travel
within the same universe? You're taking you to another universe. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So the process of space-time is space-time, right? So if you're manipulating space-time, in theory, that could bring you to a different time just as easily as it could take you to a different place.
Yeah. So there's no, like, the point that I don't think there's necessarily any direct comparison you could make between the Doctor Who universe and the Eve universe's timelines in this. They're not necessarily a one-to-one. It's you're going to a whole different place.
Right. We are going to the past, but we're not going into the past of New Eden, basically.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you're not going to the past of New Eden.
Cool. All right. Well, at least we got the multiverse of madness.
Jasper's question again for another thing we mentioned at the very beginning of the stream, but haven't mentioned again for a while. This event is very heavily focused on new players. So there is stuff that veteran players may be interested in. It's not going to be nearly as valuable as the Winter Nexus or the upcoming Guardians Gala. Those are going to be the ones that veteran players can find some like real significant challenges and get some higher rewards from. Most of this content is aimed at new players, though there's stuff that is aimed at like difficulty a bit more towards veteran players. There will be some PvE combat that you need to be like a well-fitted Tech 1 cruiser with like Tech 2 mods and good skills and know how to play the game to beat. And there will be some hacking stuff that is like Tier 4 and Tier 5 hacking challenges. So there is that stuff, but the majority of the event is aimed at new players, and the rewards reflect that. Yeah.
And so I as we kind of wrap things up, I also want to kind of express that, you know, CCB Fozzie being on the events team, I talked about this yesterday, but like, I'm actually very thankful that you're on the events team, because as far as things go, you are actually one of the most like knowledgeable people about the Eve universe and all these kinds of things that are kicking around, right? So I find it
handy.
Very likely to be, yeah, exactly. So now you don't have a problem where the events team are working on something that ends up not working with things or having to be like, you being there makes it so that from the very beginning, interfacing with the actual universe correctly is a consideration.
Yeah, and obviously this is something that if it was a designer who had less experience with the product, that would still work okay, because we would have Delegate Zero to provide that narrative support, and other designers, of course. So that's something you can always mitigate, but yeah, it speeds things up.
Right.
Sure.
I'm more worried about like lost effort, where like the events team get 3 steps down the road and then Delegate Zero goes, no, that's not a thing that can happen. And you're like, you know what I mean? Like you sanity check things from the very beginning.
Another place where that's kind of useful, both in that I've been playing the game for almost 2 decades and working at CCP for almost a decade, is that as part of the events team, we reuse a lot of stuff. We find repurposing for a lot of old things that we can do cool things with. So like an example of that, I mentioned we've got this area of space that has a teleport barrier, like toroidal space around it. And we realized that there was a blue barrier, a blue version of the Abyss barrier that was used in the Operation Frostline event, like 3-4 years ago. As we just reuse that, right? Rather than have someone have to make something new. We help reuse the micro jump drive effect for it. Like the stuff like that. Just the fact that I've been around a while and some of the other members of the team have been around a while makes it easier to kind of know what tools we have in our toolbox to be able to make things fast.
That's a really good point. Although you just triggered something in me. One of the things that we didn't really talk about is the fact that there's a lot of planetary environments. And the pictures that we've seen, this takes place in low orbit, it would seem.
Some of them do, yes. Some of them are further away, but yes, some of them are in.
And there's all different kinds of planets in there. So, like, this seems like the first time that we've seen this kind of thing since that since an Operation Frostline when that was happening.
Yeah, it's definitely got some similarities. Yeah, I guess like the asteroid that you're close to in one of the Abyss environments is like there's a big like lava asteroid that you're close to is a similar type of thing as well. But yeah, this is definitely another example of similar tech being used to what was done with the Operation Frostline.
Is there a particular reason why it was made into planetary? Like I said, there's like 8 different planetary environments put in. So
So when we kind of started concepting what we could do with this IP, the narrative folks came up with the idea of, hey, let's have Gallifrey be visible. It's a recognizable thing from the Doctor Who universe that would be kind of cool to bring, like, to show people, but that also doesn't have there's no problems from the Eve perspective of having people visit there and go back. So we knew we wanted that. And then actually some of our folks kind of did some research and recognized that there's documented other planets in the Gallifrey system. And so we kind of built stuff based on that.
So this isn't, I shouldn't take this as some sort of sign that you are working on more low orbit content for some undisclosed region in the future.
No, I don't think you should. I think we'll do more low orbit stuff in the future, but this is not a sign that that's like the direction that we're taking Eve or anything like that. We absolutely could if that's the direction that the teams involved want to take it, but we just did this because it looks cool and fit with the theme.
Very cool. All right. Well, once again, thank you guys for coming on such short notice, and thank you for being so candid about these things. These things like a crossover operates on levels far above you guys. Like, there's big considerations in play, including, like, in a lot of ways, you're putting yourself on a stage in a way that you haven't before, right? Like, if an event rolls out and has some bugs, that is just like within the Eve community, and even the smaller subset of the Eve community, the event community, that's like, things were broken for a day or two. This is really like, you're on the world stage at this point, effectively.
Well, now you're just stressing me out.
I can only assume that there's been extra precautions to make sure that, things roll out smoothly. Are you confident that this is going to be
Fingers crossed. Yeah, it's gotten plenty of testing, including like some extra testing for some of our like normal outsourcing testers. But yeah, I mean, it's always possible something goes wrong. That's the nature of this beast with making events, is we are making things pretty fast, and that means a compressed timeline for everything. But yeah, knock on wood. Hopefully it'll be great.
Did you warn BBC about us first? So. Be like,
sorry, can you repeat the question?
Did you warn the BBC first? Like, yeah, I mean, we can invite your guys to it, but you should know the Eve players are kind of jerks. Like, I mean, like, how do you worry about? Do you have any concern?
I mean,
about...
I don't know if somebody did. At least, like, I haven't actually been talking directly to the BBC reps. That's
sure.
Through other people.
Okay, fair enough.
I don't know actually if that's a discussion that happened or not.
All right, and I think I had another question, but now I just lost it. So, yeah. Well, again, like, I really appreciate you guys coming on. Is there anything else that we wanted to cover, or are we pretty much good?
I think we're probably good.
Yeah, all right. I just want to drop one last thing before we head out. Thanks for having us, Ashterothi, CCB Fozzie. Thank you so much. This was really fun. And also, as CCB Mirage pointed out, there are some Easter eggs in the last 2 Pulse episodes, which, as far as I know, no one found. So you can go back and look at them and see if you can find them. I think there's 3. I would lie and say there are 4, but just so you would always keep looking. But I think there's a total of 3.
Nth Dimensional actually asked a really good question. Before the show, you mentioned that, technically speaking, I could run the sites if I had the filaments. Is there any plans to make the sites available on Sissy first, just to make sure that
It's a good question. I don't want to rule it out, but probably not. We don't usually do that for events. We usually try to preserve the kind of surprise for them, and like let the experience be fresh on the live server. Probably not, but maybe it might be nice to get some extra eyes on this. But there would be other people we need to talk to for that.
All right. Well, once again, thank you guys for coming. Thank you guys in chat for hanging out and giving some good feedback and some questions, and more than a little bit of rage and trolling. It's been a good time for everybody. I hope it's been enlightening to everybody. And, I feel like these discussions are important because it's very easy for the player base to become almost like an echo chamber where we make decisions about what CCP's motivations are and whatever. And getting you to come here and actually talk about it from your perspective kind of, I think, helps that greatly, right? You know, we no longer have to speculate whether or not we pay, you know, the BBC was paid or you were paid, you know what I mean? Like, and those assumptions get cut off. So I think that this is really valuable, and it seems that a lot of people have really enjoyed this discussion. So, you know, awesome. And I hope to see you guys soon, the next time you piss everybody off.
See you soon.
Thanks for having us.
See you soon. All right, 07. All right. And I'm actually going to wrap things up too, because I need to go and edit things and get things ready to go and get the YouTube side of things going. So tomorrow I'm going to be back on at 1800, I think. I reserve the right to delay it to 1900, but the idea behind that is that I'm going to have like Dutch Gunner and a few other people that are interested. If you are interested in taking part in this, we're going to have people come on and discuss this now that we've seen the event, we've talked about the event mechanics, and now we've interviewed CCP about it. So tomorrow we're going to have a more player-focused discussion where we talk about these kinds of things. So Large Quafe Zero will apparently be there. Oh, absolutely, Ent, you can be there too. So until then, on behalf of CCP Fozzie, CCP Swift, and myself, thank you guys for watching. This has been the Eve Universe Show. Until next time, I've been Ashterothi, and I'll see you in space.